Hello and welcome to the podcast. Tonight is a solo edition, and it's an opportunity for me to share. I know as a podcast host, you might think that that's something I get to do a lot of, but interestingly, actually, when you host conversations, it's very, very important to stay quiet. And I love allowing people the space and the comfort to talk about what they love. And because I want to build something super sustainable in terms of a content production process, this is something that's going to come up a lot, where basically you're scheduling in people and their time, and people's time changes, and that's totally cool. And in this instance, shout out to Bram. He couldn't make it on this particular slot that we booked a few weeks back because he's becoming a dad, or I think he's already a dad, but is becoming a dad for a second time or maybe third. I'll find out when he comes on the show at the end of March. Point being is people's time is very important. I completely value it, and I'm okay with being flexible. Instead of getting super stressed and being like, oh my God, I've got to get someone in there, actually I'm reframing it and I'm going to give myself the floor. So in some ways it'll help me stay quieter in the actual conversations themselves. And in other ways, it's just a moment for me to sit down, reflect, and share about how this process is going and what's going on. I believe that on a long enough time horizon, the most sustainable form of content production is when it's something you're interested in. So this idea that made a huge amount of sense, and I've tried before, playing around in the digital marketing space. Who's the avatar? Where do they live? What do they spend their time doing? How old are they? Where can you try and contact them? Build a very distinct picture of who it is you're going to go after and go get it. This way around is much more a case of, I'm Jake. I find these things extremely interesting, and I'm going to go explore them and, come along with me. Now, there are areas that I'm obviously becoming an expert in myself, and there are areas where I've lost or failed, and I can share those, and equally where I've gained and where I've won. And so hopefully this process is, I'm just very, very excited about the future. I can see a vision, and it's already kind of coming into play. What am I going to talk about? What's caught my attention? Well, the first thing that I want to talk through is the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And what is that? Why would someone want one? A week will have gone by after I record this. So, a lot can happen in that time, but hopefully not too much has changed from this particular moment. Now, a strategic Bitcoin reserve, in the way I'm thinking of it, is in relation to the US government. So we've seen an incoming president, Mr. Donald Trump, with a landslide victory to get on and do what he's promised. And we're seeing fireworks left, right, and center. It's pretty fascinating from where I'm sitting, at least, to see someone come in who is willing to kind of shake things up. And I really like that idea of, politics is so polarizing. It's easy to get scared. It's easy to get scaremongery. It's easy to get frustrated, angry, like, oh, I lost. I'm so pissed off. This person's terrible. So the lens I always like looking at these concepts through is, if you're happy about the person that's been voted in and they enact a bunch of regulations that you like, try and put yourself in the position on the other side. And would you still like those regulations or the legislation that comes in? And so we're hearing about, for example, Ross Ulbricht, a very famous early Bitcoiner that created the Silk Road, was actually freed, pardoned by the president. You think, wow, what an incredible story that is. But then we're talking about, the strategic Bitcoin reserve. It's like, well, there was all sorts of pundits in and around the Christmas period that were talking about the fact it was definitely going to happen. They thought it was over 90% probability. And then suddenly there's a Trump meme coin on the Solana Bitcoin blockchain, on the Solana blockchain. And then suddenly I even saw there was an Ivanka Trump one that she's like, this has nothing to do with me. I mean, it just sums up the meme coin space. It's absolute pirate kind of choppy seas. It's a very good example. It's like there's Bitcoin and then there's the rest of crypto. And the amusing thing here for me is that the now US President Donald Trump, he went to the Bitcoin conference in Miami last year and gave a speech, and it was very clear that he hadn't understood the extraordinary significance between Bitcoin and the rest of crypto. And it was obvious because RFK Jr. stood up and made one of the best speeches I've ever seen, frankly. It was like, wow, this guy has really gone and done his homework. And just from my personal vantage point, it's like, this is the best politician I've ever seen. And it was so cool. And the reason I love what RFK Jr. talks about is it comes from this incredible backstory of willing to go out and litigate pharmaceutical companies and coal and oil companies. And it's just fascinating, his story. And the family he comes from, of course, has its own incredible history. The point is, there was a lot of people who are like, the US government is going to take Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Like, whoa, this is a big fucking deal. What does it mean? And there was two types or two angles to this that were important to consider. One was they already control a bunch of Bitcoin, and they've impounded it from certain criminal cases they find themselves in. I don't have the specific numbers to hand right now, but there's talk of them basically, we just won't give it back, or we won't hand it out to the creditors. So okay, cool. Well, that's one angle. It's a shift in stance on what this thing Bitcoin is. The US government taking on their balance sheet. That is a big deal. Do not get me wrong. But a far bigger deal is another idea that I saw floated around, which was that they wanted to have 2 million Bitcoins or 1 million Bitcoins or something. They were going to do 200,000 Bitcoins a year over 5 years. So they were going to take supply off the market. And from a price action perspective, from someone that's looking at Bitcoin from an investment lens, that's massive. Huge, huge, huge consistent demand coming from one of the wealthiest governments in the world. Now, what's happened so far from what I have seen is the altcoin boys were like, well, hang on a second, what about us? And they've come in and really muddied the waters. And so there's a president that hasn't understood the fundamentals of Bitcoin itself, as was clear 6 months ago. And yes, it's already 6 months of improvement, but still not there, in my opinion. I'm sure RFK will be saying, come on, mate, like, you really want to get this Bitcoin stuff, not the rest of the crap that's been thrown around. And why is that? Well, it comes back to this like very first principles approach. Like, okay, well, what is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is money. Okay, well, what is money? Well, money is a natural byproduct of the free market, a technology that fundamentally fulfills three roles: store of value, unit of account, medium of exchange. Okay, well, what's the history of money? First, we used, small glass beads, and then we have tried all sorts of different things, right? Commodity monies like gold, silver, even grain, through to the modern day debt-denominated fiat currencies that many of us was born into. Just thought that, British pounds, that was money. Well, how wrong I was. The words or the question, what is money, is a much, much deeper question, and effectively something that humans have been trial and erroring for a very, very long time. And Bitcoin is just the latest iteration of what we call money. And so, okay, strategic Bitcoin reserve. What does this mean? First of all, there's a slow process where absolutely everyone is learning that there's a new type of money that they need to pay attention to, and that is Bitcoin. And that can be, the guy that picks up your bins once a week. That can be the teacher at school. That can be your doctor. That can be your best mate. That can be the United States fucking president, right? That is absolutely everyone uses money every day. Indeed, money is 50% of every transaction in an economy. In that, we don't barter, right? We swap goods and services for money, and that money then trades in and out of other goods and services. So every time you buy something, every time you sell something, you're either you're exchanging money for something. And so money touches everything. Given that, it's unsurprising that governments are now looking at Bitcoin. And this is where I think it gets quite interesting. It's like, yes, some hardcore Bitcoin maxis over the Christmas period having a couple of lagers, like, yeah, we're going to see Bitcoin on the balance sheet of the US government. I love to see that. But the reality is very clearly just not as easy. Now, there is a bill, Cynthia Lummis, that's trying to take through a much more legal process at the point of getting Bitcoin onto the US government balance sheet. And I hope that works. But this whole there's going to be an executive order and boom, it's done, has proved to be incorrect, at least thus far. And also the nefarious side of these guys that have altcoins, like they're lobbying, right? They're literally using the funds that they've printed for themselves to go into Washington and say, no, guys, you want to have a Solana strategic reserve, you want to have a Ethereum strategic reserve, and suddenly, no, that doesn't really make sense. Why would we want that? And boom, the impetus has been lost. What's important, in my mind at least, is to take more of a macro view here. Obviously, everyone needs to figure out what money is, and slowly but surely, everyone in society is doing that. It's happening for some faster than others. And I think what's really cool is that the product market fit for Bitcoin is different for different people, and it's different in different places. What do I mean by that? Well, in a place that struggles to actually have digital payments, then using Bitcoin's great. So they don't need anything but, an SMS connection. In some instances, if you look at the startup Machankura in Africa, you can just SMS Bitcoin to each other. You don't even need an internet connection. It's unbelievable. That's one side of it. Then someone more like myself that was looking for a safe place to store value over time and not get inflated into high hell. So, okay, cool. Well, that helps too. In this case, the strategic Bitcoin reserve, I think, is best placed for niche governments. And El Salvador is the leader in this particular movement and has already seen massive, massive improvements as a result of embracing Bitcoin. You look at their tourist numbers, you look at their crime numbers, you look at their, across the board, basically, it's like tick, 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 this is working. Why wouldn't other countries do the same? And the answer is they will. I saw a table earlier today about a list of countries that had government officials that had publicly spoken about Bitcoin, and the list is getting longer and longer and longer every day. The most recent headline-grabbing one was actually the Czech Republic, which is obviously part of the European Union. And you think, oh, wow, well, that's actually pretty fascinating. What are the chances of that? And basically, it's this crazy thing where there's basically a huge game theoretic technological adoption of a technology happening that has never been seen before, right? Because money touches everything. So it's not a winner takes all. Well, as a money, I believe it is. There's only one money. Like, what's the point in having a second money that not as many people use? The market for money is one. It will be a monopoly. But it's not winner takes all in terms of the speed that you adopt this stuff. So I think it's going to be more niche governments that want to get away from the IMF, that want to get some more independence, that have more individual decision makers involved, and equally, like the process of buying this stuff. You've got to think that the US government's probably one of the leakiest places in the world. If I think about financial markets and investing, Saylor actually is a great example of this. When he first started accumulating Bitcoin, he did it without telling anyone. And he's then like, by the way, guys, I bought $250 million worth of Bitcoin. And the market hadn't moved, right? He was able to just pick it up. Whereas, oh yeah, we're going to go and buy 2 million Bitcoins or whatever the US government's gone and said. It's like, okay, well, you're not buying mine. The price will shoot up. And these guys suddenly get into a game of cat and mouse. Oh, well, the price is running. What do we do? Do we buy now or wait? And it's just, yes, it's very, very interesting to watch play out. So let me try and summarize here. A strategic Bitcoin reserve for a government is very, very important in terms of basically making their finances healthier. So, okay, you take this asset onto your balance sheet that increases in purchasing power over time. That enables them to run more services within a government and to reduce their debt. It's pretty much a win-win in my opinion. Why won't they do it? Well, this is where the very cushy relationship between political scientists and monetary scientists that has evolved over the last 100 years of modern fiat currency and central banking. It's like, okay, I've got all of these funky bureaucratic ideas as to like how we can centrally plan a government and an economy. Well, to do it, I need to pay for things. How do I do that? Well, we're just going to print money. And so the monetary theorists are like, sure, well, we can help. We think that inflation's good, and we think that we can control the money supply and use interest rates, et cetera, and figure this all out. Well, the truth is, it's incredibly difficult to do. The truth is, prices have just risen and risen and risen and risen. The truth is, inequality is far higher than ever before. The truth is, there's now another option, Bitcoin. So what I think we'll also start to see happening is, as a government official, why do you want to listen to the central bank? Why don't you just use this Bitcoin thing? What if Bitcoin's better at funding what you need than the central bankers? And there's going to be this fascinating thing. It's unclear how it will work, but I then think about commercial banks, for example. We've heard about this SARB 121 repeal in the US, which is really interesting. So US banks will be able to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and therefore they'll be able to custody it and start using it for leverage, etc., which is really, really cool. Just another phase of this adoption cycle. The point being, though, is the strategic Bitcoin reserve, like it's throwing the conversation wide open, right? Trump's come into office. He's pro crypto. I think he's yet to really understand the quite critical differences, but there's no such thing as bad news for Bitcoin. This is the cool thing. It's just extraordinary to see play out. So who's going to be next to say, look, we've actually bought some of this stuff? Well, we'll have to wait and see. If you think about like resource-rich countries that currently have to sell their natural resources $4 or €4 or 4 yen or 4 RMB, that now can just sell it for Bitcoin because they can actually just mine using their natural resources Bitcoin, and then they sell Bitcoin on the open market digitally 365 24/7. It's like that actually might be a better monetization technique. Now, admittedly, that energy is going in very, very cheap, but you have to then, you don't have to pipeline it anywhere. So someone like Russia, like if you were Putin, would you be telling anyone that you were mining Bitcoin? I wouldn't. Like, how does that benefit you? You're accumulating Bitcoin for cheaper. It's like you'll let those clowns over in the States go and advertise it to the world whilst you're picking it up as quickly as you can. So to come back to this concept of game theory, it's just so interesting, isn't it? What happens if this person takes it on? What happens if this person takes it on? What happens if this person's already bought some? What happens? I don't know. But certainly as an investor, it's a fascinating time. So what else have I found interesting? Well, the second thing I want to talk about is Nostr. And I guess this idea of digital surveillance, digital censorship, information war came and hit me in the face. And that was March, April 2020, and the pandemic, as it was so called, kicked off. And the consequent 2 years of just barrage of information that required sifting through and required primary research and required, frankly, a pretty thick skin to say, no, I don't agree with this, was largely perpetrated using large private companies and their digital monopolies. And this was what was so interesting about the whole situation. It was nefarious at its very core, right? The White House, literally like a week ago, has admitted that COVID came out of the Wuhan lab. Like, hooray, we finally made it. I remember my wife saying that to me back in 2020. I was like, you fucking kidding me? That can't possibly be true. And so it's a nefarious cover-up job from day one, and the amount of people that have side effects or have died from these horrible injections, it's absolutely shocking. Anyway, that's not why I'm diving down this particular topic, and to put that to the side for the second. I remember very clearly I had a day in Melbourne, and we were in an inner city suburb, and I would get up and leave the house in the morning. And in some ways, it's so traumatic. I can't remember if this is all on the same day or if I've kind of like meshed it all together. But at one point on our little suburban street, there was a school at the end, and the school's car park was being used as a COVID testing center. The COVID testing center was a bunch of tents that were put up by the public health department of the government of Victoria, and the queue went all the way up the street right in front of my front door. And I would go down to the guys running this thing. I'd be like, excuse me, we've got kids in the house. You can't tell me what this thing is. I've got people standing on my doorstep from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. Like, what's going on? Oh, sorry, mate, call the government. And it's like, okay, well, what's happening here? It's like I owned 198 square meters of land. And as soon as I stepped onto that pavement, it was the government's. And there was nothing I could do about this. There's this real sense of helplessness. It's like, what the fuck is going on? Anyway, you'd come out of your door with the dog in the morning. There's already people in masks queuing up to go to this testing center. And then you'd walk out into the corner, and there's then a medical center that's got a huge makeshift sign outside being like, get your COVID-19 vaccine, and there was a kind of special tented entrance that they created, and I'd seen, a 15-year-old boy coming out with his mum, like hanging his arm, hanging down. I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? This is insane. You then go to the park with the dog, and there'd be people walking their dogs with masks on, and they'd look at you through like, just, what are you doing without a mask on? You'd go from there to the coffee shop, and the coffee shop wouldn't let you sit inside the coffee shop or enter the coffee shop without showing proof of vaccination records. And there were then big stickers on all the cafe tables saying you can't sit here unless you've shown us your medical certificates. I wasn't able to go to a business lunch. I got uninvited to it because I wasn't vaccinated. And, sometimes you're in the office, sometimes you weren't allowed in the office. You were not allowed to go to any of the sports stadiums. You're not allowed to go to the cinema, not allowed to go to any restaurants. And then you pick your phone up, and in the top right-hand corner where it would say 4G or 5G, Telstra saying, let's vax. And then you turn the TV on, and there's government of Victoria, Australia, giving adverts about XYZ as to why it's really important to go and get your vaccine. And you're just like, whoa, this is the biggest advertising campaign I've ever seen, without a shadow of a doubt. And if you even remotely questioned what was going on, you were a pariah. Public health is more important than individual choice. Get away from me. It's like, whoa, what is going on here? Anyway, long story short, the social media platforms were absolutely playing their parts. The Twitter files is a great example, since Elon Musk bought that business and opened up all of the stuff that had been going on. There's thousands and thousands of examples of the US government intervening on what was or wasn't allowed to be said. The same applied here in Australia. Zuckerberg, who's paying him? Well, at the end of the day, you're the user, right? Oh, it's really easy to create an account. It's really easy to create content. It's really easy to share my message. Oh, I just use it to hang out with my family and friends. At what cost? Well, the cost is very clear. You're operating on someone else's real estate. So you go and say something that they don't like, shadow banned. Oops, no one's finding my profile any longer. Freedom of speech, but no freedom of reach. And then it's like, oh no, actually now community guidelines says you, and your whole channel just cancelled. This happened to some friends of mine on all these different platforms, right? And at the end of the day, I respect the rights of a private business to treat their customers however they so wish, right? If you don't want me on your platform, that's your choice. It's not sold as that, right? It's like, your money in the bank. Oh, it's yours. Come and spend all your life with us and we'll look after you. It's actually like all your money is being used to make more money on the back end. And the moment that you put it in there, it's not actually yours. It's kind of the same. And so this advertising model, where I've heard it more recently called surveillance capitalism, which is a nice phrase for it. It clearly makes people addicted. It's designed to be addicted. It clearly makes people sick mentally. It clearly is basically at the whim of the highest bidder. What I mean by that is, who's their customer? Who's actually paying these people? And when you start digging into that, it's very clear who's paying them. And they get what they want, right? And with that, it's like, where do you get your information from? What's real? What's not real? And it's just, it's a fucking mess at the end of the day. You're like, wow, what the hell is going on out there? So much so that you're like, why do I know what I know? Anyway, all this goes to say, I think I first came across Nostr. It's only 2 years old. So Nostr, for those that don't know, Nostr is a decentralized protocol in the same way that Bitcoin is a decentralized protocol. And Nostr was born out of a community of Bitcoin Lightning developers. And they were looking at basically online transactions, micropayments, Bitcoin native. And they've borrowed some of the really interesting design that Bitcoin has. So you have a Nostr account is really a key pair. So you have an npub and an nsec. And the nsec in particular is the private key for a Nostr profile. And every time that Nostr profile posts notes, so Nostr stands for notes and other stuff over relay, every time that account posts something, it has to have been done by those two keys. The problem with social media traditionally is just so obvious, right? They're called walled gardens, monopolies, and they just do not allow for anything that their customers, i.e. the advertising and the paying customers, don't allow for. And I'm sure that, you think about your own experiences on these platforms, you'll have plenty to go with that highlights this. Anyway, Nostr, it's really small, 18,000 users, but everything you state on this well, everything that you broadcast to the network cannot be deleted, full stop. And with that in mind, it's like, as a user, it's like, if I post this, I can't retract it. So it immediately alters your interaction with it, which is fascinating. Okay, you're almost more accountable to your word. And in the same way that Bitcoin is the first time that we stumbled across like digital scarcity. Like, digital scarcity did not exist before Bitcoin because you just copy paste anything. Nostr's kind of similar, but in speech. You're like, whoa, okay, that account had to have said that because that key pair signed off that post. And with that in mind, it's like, okay, so I've played around with content creation, posting podcasts, writing tweets, doing Instagram. And I've had varying success with different ideas and different attempts. But hang on, so if I put my time and energy into building a Twitter profile, or now as it's called X, formerly Twitter, or into an Instagram profile, or into a YouTube channel, what happens if they switch me off? Well, it's gone. That's it. Finished. And from an investor perspective, from a capital allocator perspective, that's a very poor decision. You're building on quicksand. Well, what's Nostr? Well, Nostr actually is kind of like Bitcoin, right? You're building with steel instead of wood. It can't catch fire. You've got a solid foundation to build an audience from. And as soon as you start playing around with it, you then start to dig into the deeper layers, which I think will prove to be where the genuine value is driven. But Nostr currently is an uncensorable social media experience. And that, initially at least, is enough to get attention. It's like, okay, well, if I start posting on this thing, it can't be taken away from me. Is that right? And it's like, yes, that's right. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to try. And that for me was enough. I don't want to be switched off. It's absolutely imperative that that's actually not possible. And there's a big difference between not being able to be switched off and saying you won't be. Like a Rumble, for example. Oh, we believe in free speech. Sure. The CEO ends up in some jail. They'll persuade him to change the rules. Or Telegram. This recently happened with Telegram, right? The messaging app, super popular messaging app. And the CEO got caught out in France, and before you know it, they've started changing some of their privacy regulations. It's only human, and that's okay. But recognizing that's the important thing. So it's like, okay, what's this Nostr thing? After a year or so of having a profile, playing around a bit, I started up my new podcast, and I was absolutely adamant that Nostr was part of the production. And so if I think through my podcast, you've got production, publishing, and promotion as like the three main columns of what you actually have to complete in order to get a podcast out there. And so it's a case like, how does Nostr fit into that process? Well, it's not really part of the production process per se, but it absolutely is part of the publishing. So I use something called Nostr.build, where I can upload short form videos, and Nostr.build is basically it's like a host for this data. If you log into your X account and you post something, who's paying for that and how's it stored? Well, they're paying for it, X, in favor of you spending their time there. And so again, you're the product, right? There are real world costs to having an Instagram profile that someone else is bearing in favor of them being able to advertise to you. Nostr's different. It's more of a pay to play. I also pay for Primal, became a paying subscriber of theirs, and also Albi. And these tools all help me to like piece together different aspects of what now a Nostr experience actually is. One of my main concerns with posting on Nostr was reach. I was like, but just what's the point? There's no one on there. No one's going to look at it. And what's interesting, i.e. the point of this solo riff, is that in my first week, I had more views on Nostr than all of the legacy platforms combined, times by 4. Whoa, that is a big difference. Now, admittedly, after week 2, week 3, that's shifted, and that's because it's just how it works, and it's very interesting. I'm going to track these numbers over time and see how it evolves. But it's certainly something that it wasn't obvious that was going to be the case. And that's okay. So that's why I'm sharing with you too. It's so interesting. Nostr, okay, you post stuff on there, people are actually seeing it. And I'll post a short form video, 5 minutes long, and I'll get 130 unique views. Now that's not massive, but it's not nothing. And there's no algorithm with Nostr that's like resurfacing content the same way like a YouTube video can be resurfaced on someone's feed years later. That's not happening, at least not yet. Someone might build that, and you might subscribe to a client that shows you old footage around a specific hashtag or around a specific topic. I don't know how that's going to work, but it will get built, I'm sure. And so, in conclusion, Nostr is already an interesting place to post content. What I know absolutely deep down is that, and I'm tempted to do this in a sense, like what would it look like if you went Nostr only? You don't bother with RSS feeds into iTunes, you don't bother with YouTube, you don't bother with X. And at this stage, the reason I haven't done that is because the marginal cost increase of just blasting my content everywhere is actually not that high. And so therefore, I feel like it makes sense to leverage these existing tools to just put this message out there, to broadcast this stuff. And that's a good word, actually. That's how I'm starting to think of. So when I think of Instagram or YouTube or X or TikTok that I'm going to use as well, it's not social for me. I'm not hanging out on those platforms and replying to comments all the time and trying to make friends with people. They are broadcasting platforms for me to get this content out to and see what comes back. Whereas Nostr, I'm actually spending time replying to people, looking at what they're actually creating, and I know it's because it's a better capital allocation. And that is probably the message of this, second interesting point. To get to my third and final point of today, again, because the point of this is what do I find interesting, I also want to make sure that what I share is stuff I've actually been doing. And the final one, I wrote down frequency. And this will probably throw a few people off, and that's okay. The more I go on this journey, the more spiritual I become. And much like this solo riff, I'm kind of channeling something. Like I'm just here talking to a webcam. Loser, what are you doing? Or like, have you got no notes? Where's this all coming from? And it's, I think, to do with frequency. And so to mention a couple of stories. So shout out to Sam Cathro, who was probably the first person that really started to connect the dots for me between deep meditation, Bitcoin, and spirituality, and the ability for one to operate at certain frequencies and opportunities that arise as a result of being at a certain frequency. And literally, like, certain words you use can either increase or decrease your frequency. And second shout out is to Jason Parks, who I've been working with now for a few months. And he's a very, very advanced manifester and meditator and energetics guy. And what's been so cool is that I'm learning to heighten the frequency that I operate at. And that is done through ease and grace. And so when you come across stuff in your day-to-day life that causes anger or resentment or fear, it's almost like you have to observe it and notice that that's not the right direction to go in. And what's coming out of that is literally this creative experience of this podcast. I just, deep down, I know that there's a message I have and there's a journey I'm going to go on, and that one day these conversations that I'm able to orchestrate are going to be of extraordinarily high value to a massive, massive amount of people. And not because I'm desperate to get their attention, but because I think they're interesting. And a lot of other people are going to think they're interesting too. But to get to that, it's something Jason explained recently, that like an idea is something that already exists and will come into reality, but it can come into reality through different souls, different spirits. And you have to be at a certain frequency in order to receive this information, like downloads. What is creativity? Well, everything you see around you was once someone's idea. When I look in the screen behind me, that sofa, the record player, the picture on the wall. Like someone had an idea that eventually became a physical thing, and that's really what this is. It's playing around in different frequencies, and you can coach yourself to alter those different states or different operating software or operating systems that you're actually in. And so I'm by no means an expert at this, but I'm very much a student of it. And it's absolutely fascinating to see how it's changing my life. And I would argue that Bitcoin's obviously played a big part of this, where I've been able to take financial wealth and reallocate it into Bitcoin and have a far, far higher conviction on the future, have a far higher sense of purpose, have a far higher sense of relaxation even. It's like, oh, I've kind of solved that problem now. And my purchasing power is going to continue to increase, and I'm going to be able to draw down on it as and when I need in the future. But as that happens, it's created more space. And as you have more space, you have more time. And with that, new ideas. I was like, where does this all come from? Well, again, it's kind of about frequency. And so some other stuff that we've been doing in and around this is about vision and your self-image. And if you were to meditate for a little bit and think about like all the things in the world that you want to do, and you then need to separate like a to-do and a to-do list and a task list from a goals list. You think about like your bucket list. Like what are these like 10 things that you have to get done? And anyway, the self-image thing is so interesting because if you cannot envisage yourself actually doing the thing that you think you want to do, you'll never do it. And that could be as simple as like speak another language. Okay, well, do you definitely want to do that? 1, 2, is it in your self-image in the future? And if it is, and those are true, then you start to fill in the blanks before then. It's like how to actually get to that point. And it's also then helpful for decision making. Like as opportunities come up, this is a mistake I've made in the past where an opportunity arose and I'm like, I've manifested this. It's come to me. I've been able to attract this because of increasing my frequency. What Jason's teaching me in a more sophisticated manner is that felt to be true at the time, but actually the question should then have been, well, what's your self-image? What is your vision of the future? Where are you going, Jake? And the more detailed you are about it, the more serious you are about it, the more focused you are on that future version of yourself, the faster that you'll get there. Because you're able to then say to these opportunities that appear, well, that's not right for me. And so one of the reasons I'm doing this as a solo project is like, I don't want anyone else to slow me down, basically. It's like I've had co-founders in the past that they were all amazing people. They all brought a lot to my table. They all brought many lessons for me. And those are a complete gift. And they worked out really well in some cases and really badly in others. And that's all okay. And full respect to all those people who were just playing the hand that they saw best at the time. But in this case, I don't want someone else to get the fuck in the way, basically. It's like I don't need this alternative energy. I don't need this baggage of emotions. And I'm off. I'm going and I'm going to get there. And that's so exciting. But without this energy work, without this frequency, it's basically impossible. And so without doing the work in that area, then one's going to really, really struggle to get any lasting results. I'd encourage you to head back to the previous episode if you're still listening to this solo one, because Dr. Jin Ong joined me. Jin's fucking awesome and talks a lot about working on the emotional state. And if you can clear a lot of trauma, it can be positive and negative previous emotions, then what comes out of that is much more, almost like a phrase would be based thinking. It's like you're starting from a solid place of balanced positivity. You then kick a lot more goals than you ever thought possible. And she argues that without doing the energetics work, you'll just never run fast, or like you'll never achieve your true potential or live your full truth. And all of that wraps into this idea of frequency, because ultimately, why is this information appearing now? Why didn't you hear this before? Why didn't someone teach it to you when you were young? For those of you out there that are still listening to this, like why? How is this information coming available to you? Why is it now appearing? And it's all for a reason, right? It's because at some point in the not too distant past, you've raised your frequency to a level where you're ready to actually receive this, and not just receive it, but then action it. And others would have dropped off at like minute 5, right? And someone would be thinking, oh, I'm glad I listened to the end of that because that was cool. Oh my God, this is interesting. Like, especially as an investor, I'm like, imagine investing in people that have done this work. Whoa. Like it's out there on the risk curve. You've got Bitcoin as the backup base case, which is totally cool. It's just going to pump away as your savings account for the next decade. Well, let's go and take some more risk. Who has figured out that they need to work on this stuff before they even think about a business idea? Because the business idea that comes to them once it's done is going to be far, far more powerful and far more achievable as a result of doing it. So maybe I'll leave it with this. If you've got to the end of this episode and this resonates with you, and you're interested in starting businesses, you're interested in starting companies with an investor, and you have or haven't done this work, but you're like, that sounds kind of cool, then reach out, because I'd love to talk to you and hear what your story is and understand what resonated with you. Thank you so much for joining me on this solo rant. Sending all the very best, and thank you so much for listening.